All right, let's get the party started, as they would say. So, good morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Matt Dixon. I work at Eclipse Telecom. We're one of the nation's leading telecommunications consulting firms. Today in our webinar, we'll be covering some of the changes made recently by Broadcom to VMware pricing and licensing, its impact on you, and then potential ways to plot a most efficient path forward for your organization. Joining me today are two of the brightest minds in the industry on this particular topic. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we'll go through a little bit about what the webinar is going to cover and the format of the webinar as well. So, Kirk, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Kirk Armstrong, Chief Technology Officer here at Eclipse. I've been here for about 12 years. I lead any and all negotiations here within Eclipse and my team in around infrastructure, be it software, hardware, infrastructure as a service, disaster recovery, co-location. And yeah, no, definitely excited here to get into this, Matt, because a lot of things that are being said that maybe or maybe aren't true the topic.
Dimitri.
Hey, thank you, Matt. My name is Dimitri DeVos. I'm the Vice President of Solutions Architecture here at TierPoint. I manage a team of solutions architects, which is the overlay. We come in for the strategic, complicated, hairy deals, if you will. I've been with TierPoint for 7 years plus now, and I've been in the industry for about too many years, 20 plus at this point. Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, great. Well, today's webinar, we're going to do it in a little bit of two parts, I guess, for lack of a better term. Part one, we're really just going to go into what those licensing models changes look like and the impacts it may be having on you with your next renewal. We're going to pause at the end of that for questions and answers related to those changes. At any time, please feel free to post your questions into the meeting or the webinar chat here, and we'll try to address those at the break or as they come up if it's germane at that moment. Then in part two, I think the more exciting part, we're going to talk about how do you plot your path forward, whether that's maximizing your VMware investment, if that's the route you're going to take, or looking at other compelling alternatives, open source, KVM, as a service models. Certainly, this change has, I would say, brought about the need to really be more mindful about your virtual infrastructure, the choices you're making now, and how that's going to impact you over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's going to be pretty brisk pace here, lots to cover. So we're just going to actually dive right in. And I'm going to start with the most obvious question for Dimitri. What are the changes that have been made? And what impact is that going to have on companies when it comes time to renew their VMware licensing?
Yeah, there have been some serious changes, and to be frank with you, they're still in flux. I'm still hearing some changes, concessions, if you will, based on some of the feedback that Broadcom and VMware have received. But I'll give you an overview here. You mind if I share a slide or two?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So tell me if you see I see.
I have it.
Right. So, hey, at a high level, VMware is shifting from a perpetual to a subscription model. This is, they're taking the 50 some odd various parts and pieces, and you used to be able to buy them a la carte, or in some of them, there were some bundles. And you would be able to buy them perpetually and then just add on your support as you needed. That's going away completely. It's 100% subscription, and in addition to that, they're doing the subscription based on physical CPUs. In the past, some of the costs were based on physical CPU cores. In the past, it was either CPUs or VRAM, depending on if you were with a cloud service provider. Now, they've simplified the portfolio down to basically 4 options here. At the top and the most robust is the vCloud Foundation, which gives you the basic components is vSphere, vSphan, NSX, and the ARIA suite, which formerly was vRealize. The next level down is the VMware vSphere Foundation, or VVF, as they say, which has vSphere and some of the basic components of ARIA. And then there's vSphere Standard and vSphere Essentials, primarily just having very limited options and functionality to that. Another thing that's important, and we need to verify that. I'm hearing this is one of those areas of concession with support. There's new support agreements for the folks who have perpetual licenses and I do not have a support agreement. They're no longer receiving updates. In order to receive updates, you have to have a support agreement. They are providing 0-day security patches for those that do not renew their support, but there are a number of limitations to what you get. The other important thing to note is if you're at the point where you need to renew support or buy support, you will be required to purchase one of the new licensing models going forward. Just at a high level, I wanted to take you through what a VMware, the VCF is. And you can see there's a lot to it. And they bundled a number of different options here. You have the Enterprise, NSX, and vSAN, as well as the ARIA suite. There are some add-ons that you're able to purchase here and add to it, but only if you have the VCF model. The VVF, as you can see, a little bit smaller, and the ARIA suite much more limited. And there are some things that you can add, but you'll notice there's certain things that you aren't able to add here that you have to have the VCF version for. And then the last thing, when it comes to partners, service providers, they've done a pretty big change there. You may have heard. In terms of the partner program, Broadcom and VMware have really pared it back. They've pared it from 4,500 partners down to a few hundred worldwide. This is by design. And they only want to invest in their most strategic partners. Now, and it's an invitation only based on performance and certifications and proficiency. The top level is the Pinnacle Partner Program. And in that, in the US, there's only 12 Pinnacle cloud providers, VMware cloud service providers. In the US, there's only 12 of them. I'm happy to say that TierPoint is one of those partners that was invited into the program here in the US. I think there's roughly about 100-ish worldwide in the Pinnacle program. Hey, any questions?
Dimitri, could you explain to us, as you looked at that, you described we went from 4,500 to a few hundred to then we have the 12. So what did the 12 have? What are the advantage of going with the 12 as opposed to living within those 100? And what happened to the thousands of other partners that are no longer part of that program?
So that's a good question. There are roughly, in addition to Pinnacle, there's the Principal, Advanced, and Pinnacle. So there's 3 tiers, if you will. So the partners that are in the Pinnacle, they're receiving the most, in air quotes, love from VMware, right? They're receiving the best support, the access to product development and the product roadmap. Most importantly, they have the best discounting and the best ability to pass that discounting on to their customers. That's one of the best benefits of being a Pinnacle partner. And each of the tiers below that have a gradation of that discounting as well, and those advantages too.
And then if you're working with one of the thousands that is no longer part of the program, A, like how do you figure that out? And B, what happens to your partner that maybe you've had for several years now that is no longer able to participate in any of those tier levels? What does that look like?
That is one of the million-dollar questions that's been going around. VMware has and is developing and rolling out a white label program. So Pinnacle partners like ourselves, if we chose to participate in the white label program, could then resell or support those partners and their subsequent customers in a white label format. That's still being developed as I understand it and rolled out. So it's a bit of a scramble. That said, in the EU especially, this is one of the areas where the government is pushing back on that. There's some concessions that I think that are being negotiated as well. So we'll wait. It remains to be seen exactly how the cards will fall, but that's where we are today.
Okay. Kirk, anything from your side to add on some of these licensing changes and the impacts?
I think this just goes back to making sure that you understand the totality of what VMware can offer you. I think that like it's always been a cost conversation of like, hey, the totality of the suite around you. And I think we'll get into that here in a little bit of, hey, here are some of the additional things that are going to be made available to you as well.
Well, let's turn our attention to that then. So with these big changes, partners, I'm going to say evaporating. They may not be, Dimitri, but they're now one step removed potentially, right? Where they're having to purchase not from Broadcom or VMware directly, but through a Pinnacle partner, for example. Changes to getting rid of 56 SKUs and reducing it down to these bundled programs. Kurt, help us understand like what are our options? What are our path forwards here? What are some of the things we got to be thinking about well ahead of the time of our renewal to make sure we're not getting caught on our back foot here?
Yeah, no, Matt, I think that's a perfect question. And that's really it is you have to have a strategy going into this with VMware Broadcom. The way that we look at it, there's really 4 ways forward. The first one, I think the least strategic, not necessarily least strategic, but most costly of this is, hey, the grin and bear it model, which is, hey, I'm just going to keep buying everything that I have from VMware today. I'm not going to change anything. I'm not going to adjust and bring other things into the suite. This is, hey, my VMware is my VMware. The cost went up, and hey, I'm going to continue to utilize that moving forward. 2 is that idea of, hey, kind of continuing to bring things in that are being made available to you within the VMware suite. So kind of that idea, and Dimitri brings this up, which is like, hey, you're getting access to ARIA, you're having access to the DR and backup functions that now live within VMware, be it some add-on functionality into that. So really maximizing your VMware cost and really managing your ancillary costs around the infrastructure as well. So hey, some of your reporting or management platforms, your backup platforms, or even your DR programs, some of that software may change based on trying to maximize what you have with VMware. The third is what I'll call like, hey, I take my VMware problem and give it to somebody else. So move to one of the infrastructure as a service providers, such as a tier point in this instance, and say, hey, we would rather buy our VMware from you moving forward, help use their economies of scale and keep the cost as low as possible. And then the fourth one then is more the, hey, I'm going to say, hey, to heck with it, VMware. We're leaving. We're going to Nutanix. We're going to Azure Stack. We're going to go to KVM. You could go as extreme as saying, hey, I'm going to build hyperscaler native, which would be like, hey, let me take advantage of the Azure, AWS, GCP native functionality. I want to be really clear here, though, that you hear in those 4, one of those was not, hey, I want to take my VMware and put it out in AWS or Azure GCP. That is not an option that reduces any of your VMware risk in this. Really, all it does is take my problem from one place and puts it in another, which is something we really are stressing to make sure our clients are fully aware of in this, that, hey, that is not a solve for the VMware issue.
Let me just recap real quick here, Kirk. Sounds like our options are pay the software tax and maybe not the people tax, right? Because if you're going to make some of these shifts, it's going to be retraining, this, that, and the other. 2, use all of what you're now being generously given, right? Here's a bundle. Let's make sure we're using it all. 3 is looking at alternative hypervisors that live outside of VMware, whether that's just and then the other is moving to as a service model where that cost is, I guess, for lack of a better term, hidden behind the model where you don't have to worry about it. You're just pricing that as a service model. Would you say that's a pretty accurate representation?
Yeah, those are them.
Well, let me pause. I think we got probably a question that's at the top of everybody's mind here. What's the bottom line? Like, how much of an increase are we seeing? What are we expecting? And how the heck do I plan and budget for this? Like, what should people be anticipating with their next renewal? Dimitri or Kurt, but please jump in there and tell us what that could potentially look like.
This has been my life for the last 6 weeks with our customers, because not only are the folks who have perpetual licenses affected, but the customers who we support through the cloud service provider have also gone up. We've broken it down into 3 buckets. There's folks that have like minimal impact. In fact, there's a few out there that surprisingly have had a lowered bill. Now, keep in mind, when we are doing it, we're looking at it a VRAM versus a CPU model. So there's some nuances when you're in a cloud service provider program. There's folks, and I'd say majority of them have been marginally impacted. And then there's a number of customers who have been extraordinarily impacted in the realms of 30, 40, 50% price increases over what they were paying. To answer your question, though, it really depends on your environment and how your environment's sized. Is it right sized? Do you have extraneous compute that you're now going to need to license? The other aspect is disaster recovery. In the past license model, DR nodes did not need to be licensed if you're using a tool like Zerto, where they're not running live workloads. Now they do, and that's a big cost consideration. If you're going to have to duplicate your licenses from production and DR. So the bottom line, it varies, and it's going to take a little bit of work to figure that out.
So what does it look like to start that work, Dimitri? Is that reaching out? I'll do the shameless plug here. Your friends at Eclipse can help you figure some of this out as well. But from a tier point perspective, maybe they're not an existing tier point customer. You're in the Pinnacle 12. They want to have a conversation with you. What does that look like so they can plan and get ahead of that? And again, make sure they're accounting for it in their budget cycles.
I wouldn't call it a shameless plug. I would call it as, hey, you really need to have an independent set of eyes helping you here, because it is very complicated and confusing, and the sands are shifting. So having a partner like Eclipse or TierPoint will help you there. But I'd like to go back to one of the points in earlier. You had a couple different options. Okay, suck it up and pay the bill. Or maybe adjust how you're, the overlapping technologies. And then the third was probably looking at a migration off. There's pros and cons to each of them. I think in the near term, if you haven't started a migration or cloud adoption strategy, or if you haven't been considering that, it really comes down to optimizing what you're using today, the licensings you have today, and getting on the right terms. There's yearly terms and 3-year term contracts now based on your IT roadmap. And that's where Eclipse and TierPoint or a partner like us can help you. Let's look at your roadmap. What are you looking to do with your cloud strategy overall as you move towards the public cloud or SaaS offerings, and moving at a workload by workload level, an application level?
Kirk, I think you wanted to add something there.
Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect kind of idea here, that, hey, you really need to be evaluating what this is going to be. I think there's a lot of excitement right now with this being within the first 5 months since the announcement from VMware Broadcom of the updated partner ecosystem. This is going to continue to happen over the next 5 years. This is not hey, there are some unfortunate companies that are getting caught up in 2024. This is a problem that will extend out into 2028, 2029. Have a plan for this, and hey, really start to look at and be critical of what are applications that are on my SaaS roadmap. How do I pull those up in my journey to make sure that I'm minimizing my long-term VMware cost? there are applications that exist in environments that cannot possibly be migrated off of VMware. We're not blind to that, but what we really want to be mindful of is, hey, how do I contain my VMware cost? How do I make sure that I'm actualizing the most of it? And also, hey, if there are costs that I can remove, then let's get those budgeted and planned and migrated off, because I think Dimitri rightfully pointed out, hey, there is a cost increase. We've seen as high as 12x from an increase. We've seen as low as a maybe cost neutral, but this is something even with the existing providers, it's a lot of, hey, look in the right hand, but not the left from a negotiation perspective, that there's a lot of give and take, and it's mostly take from Broadcom VMware. They are prepared not to have as many partners. They are prepared not to have as many customers, but this is a consistent item from Broadcom that they are going to continue down this roadmap. This is their strategic vision for Broadcom, and kind of the adjunct acquisition of Symantec as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kirk. The history of Broadcom doing this with other acquisitions is steep and deep. They tend not to take their foot off the gas unless forced to do so, and they're prepared to deal with those ramifications. Kirk and Dimitri, you talked about what that price difference is. I think the most challenging part is, and Dimitri, you hit this very well, you don't know until you know, because we've seen educational discounts removed, for example. What does your DR environment look like? What does that licensing look like today? Are you running full parity between your DR and production environments? This is where I think we've typically seen, Kirk, in our instances, to your point, 10x is realistic, could happen. It really depends on how you're purchasing today. If you're getting discounting, being an educational entity, for example, the robustness of your DR architecture, there really is no hard and fast rule where you can just plug into a calculator and have it spit out, oh, you're going to pay 10, 20, 30% more. I will tell you, and I'm sure we'll share some of this out. If you follow Eclipse on LinkedIn, we share this stuff out all the time. You will see very real, tangible examples of 10 and 12x increases. So those do exist out there. And this isn't to scare you. It's just to say it's hard to peg that range today. Start doing your due diligence now, working with partners like Eclipse or TierPoint to dial in exactly what that looks like for your organization. So we talked about maximizing your VMware spend under these new bundles. In practice, what does that look like? What are some of the maybe components you're licensing or using today, using other software that would fit under one of these models where you, again, migrate those capabilities from a quote unquote third-party software to VMware native alternatives? Any thoughts there, Kirk or Dimitri, on some common examples that make sense as you look at these new bundles?
Yeah, I can lead off with this, and I think we've already brought up the big Z in the room, which is Zerto. The way that they will continue to get mindshare and adoption. This is also changing around Veeam. These are two pretty industry standard tools that are being used inside of enterprises, along with inside of service providers. The way that those are being priced and licensed are going to change from an under VMware perspective. Dimitri brought up the ARIA piece earlier. That is something that, hey, clients should be taking advantage of, that vRealize becoming into their existing stack. But yeah, I don't know, Dimitri, anything else that comes top of mind to you?
Yeah, you're spot on. Again, these are not trivial moves, though, so you have to be wary of that. Zerto and Veeam are definitely affected. TierPoint is one of Zerto's top providers, 3 years running, actually, partners, and we are in close conversations with them. They're working on some updates that might help with this. More to come on that, though. I may have spilled the beans there, so don't quote me on that. But other things to consider, though, is if you're in first of all, you want to make sure that you buy the right license model. A lot of folks will say, oh, based on what I have today, I need VCF. But what you have today, you may not be using them. So you may be able to go with a VFF model, or maybe even something more basic like an Enterprise or Enterprise Plus. So you have to, think about that first. But once you're in those models, or you're considering those models, are there add-ons that I can take advantage of, like vSAN? Can I replace some of my SAN storage? Can I go to a vSAN model lower my SAN costs going forward? The firewalls, can I look at NSX and VMware's advanced firewall protection and replace my physical firewalls for that? Again, these are transformational. They're not trivial, transformational steps that you would want to make and as you go through. It's all part of really having a good and 3-year IT strategy laid out. And the last part I would say is use those terms wisely. 1 year, 3-year terms. If you're going to buy something now that you don't plan to use a feature of until year 2 or 3, don't buy it. Just renew on the 1 year. I believe you can even, and Kirk, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, mix and match. You can buy some that are 3-year and some that are 1-year licenses and sort of work that way.
I think right now it's about putting those puzzle pieces together, right? And really looking at, to your point, start now, right? Even if your renewals, maybe you got lucky and you just renewed before all this nonsense occurred, you got to be thinking today about what the next 3 years looks like under this new model. Because to your point, Dimitri, this isn't flip one switch and it's working on the other, right? This is a process to migrate those capabilities and workloads to the most cost-effective delivery method go forward. I'm sorry, Kirk, I think you had something to say there.
Yeah, I think that there's some architectural conversations. I think, Dimitri, you're bringing it up perfectly, which is like, hey, there's a lot of things that are easy to say, hard to do. The one I would add on to that is I think a lot of folks are hearing well, if I have to license my DR, why would I not just do active? Well, now we're entering into that conversation a lot, which is, what does it really mean to be active? What is my roadmap to active? Because and I know no Eclipse client has ever had this issue, no SharePoint client, but like, hey, a true DR environment and getting a client even to set that up, let alone having a separate fully active data center, so for full active application between the two. But I don't know, Dimitri, are you seeing that conversation start to come forward here as well?
There has been those questions, and again, it comes down to, can the application support that? First of all, you having the replication be synchronous between two sites brings about, first of all, the architecture of the application, but then the latency considerations. If you have to be within a certain distance so that these transactions replicate in millisecond times, then are you really in a good DR scenario to begin with? Is it far enough away? Because that's one of the components you look at when you think DR, right? Am I geographically disparate?
I think you hit on a good point there, Dimitri. There may be workloads that make sense to run in an active arrangement, but there may be, and probably sometimes your most important workloads that are most sensitive to those latency changes that may not be a great fit to run under that model. So again, it just goes back to, you can't just look at the licensing. You got to look at the totality of your architecture from software on down, even user experience on down, to come up with the right plan here. So I wish there was easy answers we could give everybody today that just says you're going to pay 20% more. Here's how you renew and go at it. But I think this is a moment in time that's representing a sea change event for people to really take a methodical look at how they're doing application delivery, how they have their DR set up, and really, to your point, what that roadmap for them looks like over the next several years around cloud migration, for example, software as a service migration, and what workloads they'll continue to host. Kirk, did you have something else to add there?
No.
Okay. Dimitri, can you talk to us? I think this is certainly something I wanted to point out. As people are building that 3-year path, I think picking the right partner is important as well, because sometimes the partner you choose may not have routes or paths to all of that migration, right? Saying, today I'm going to start here. I'm going to continue to host my own workloads, but over time, I want to move things out to IaaS, for example. Tell us a little bit about considerations when you're picking a partner for that roadmap. How do you have to think about their capabilities as you evolve and they have to evolve with you? Can you give us some thoughts there?
That's a very good question, and I would start with, first of all, in any of these scenarios, I think what's happening with VMware and the Broadcom changes is it's really forcing everybody's hand to make a cloud strategy, to really define that cloud strategy. And when you're doing that, there's a number of ways of approaching it. So you'll have an approach from the technology perspective. How does this improve my efficiency? How do I make things faster, smoother? But there's also the business side of it. How will my cloud strategy help the business? How will the business benefit? Will I have more productivity? Will I have better brand image? Will I drive more revenue? So those are the two areas that, as you're developing that cloud strategy, you need to sort of start to think about. Now, a partner who is agnostic and understands there's various ways of solving business objectives through various technology options is a partner that you'd want to work with. If you're working with a partner who's just really just a VMware shop only, then you're going to get a VMware only answer, and that is going to limit your choices there. But you want to focus on or find a partner who has a strong VMware practice as well as other practices, whether it's in other platforms like Nutanix, or even in the public cloud. So Azure and AWS or Google, and a good strong bench of professional and consulting services to help you through that process. That's what I would be guiding folks to look at. Who's got a broad base of products and portfolio to help me solve my problem at the workload level?
Kirk, I'm sure you have some thoughts to share here as we help us select the right partners that we work with. How do the Eclipse think about our partner network, who we choose to work with? And if I had to check a little top 3 things to look out for here, particularly with these changes, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece in this, and I think that Dimitri hit it well, which is variety and options of the ways I can go forward and how can I consume this. The number one thing I would be on the lookout for, though, in this is your cloud strategy that you're deploying a lift and shift out to AWS, GCP, and Azure. If that is your, hey, I'm going to pick up my VMware and I'm going to move it to one of those. That is not a strategy. That is merely a tactic and an overall. You have to extend out and look at the totality of what do I plan to do with this long term? How do I get it to be more cloud native? How do I get it to be more SaaS forward? How am I actualizing and realizing a lot of the benefits that are being given to me via the Azures and the GCPs and the AWSs of the world? Because there's a ton of development tool. There's a ton of content delivery tools. There's a lot inside of all of these platforms. But if you're living only in your bucket and you're saying, hey, you know what, my HPE, my Cisco, my Dell, or even my Nutanix, hey, they went end of life, and hey, I wanted to shoot everything up to the cloud. That's a change of target, not really a change of, hey, the way that I choose to consume this. So I'd be very careful of those as well. And then, hey, I'd make sure that, hey, that the partner has a deep bench to make sure that, hey, I can actualize this. There's a, hey, this idea of how do I take something from the whiteboard and put it into reality? Because, hey, you can have a really beautiful plan, but hey, if they don't have the bench to help you over time do that, this is not a one-time event. This is not a waterfall approach. You have to take this as an agile approach over time and saying, hey, what iteration am I taking at what time to get to my full end state? But unfortunately, to Matt's point earlier, I can't just toggle the light switch and, hey, oh my God, I'm cloud native from the beginning, and I no longer have a VMware problem. This is a slow dimmer switch that unfortunately has a lot of resistance built into it.
Kirk, you can't flip that switch. I mean, you may, by lifting and shifting, solve one problem, but bringing in 3 other problems. As you move from one type of platform and your staff, your team is familiar with VMware, managing public cloud is a completely different skill set and experience level and understanding. And it also comes with a number of controls that you need to implement, especially in the cost areas. We hear all the time, I moved to the cloud and my bill is now 3 times, 4 times more expensive than it was estimated. It's all about understanding and using the application so you can rehost them. That's your first step. And it's the baby step as you move to a cloud strategy. Refactoring and re-architecting is a continuous effort that you have to go through.
Can we talk a little bit about, I think we get too focused sometimes on the workload itself. What about the ecosystem around your infrastructure? What are those impacts as you make some of these big holistic changes? Things like monitoring and learning, for example, right? That can change substantially depending on your delivery methodology for your virtual infrastructure. So talk to us a little about some of the things. We are starting to get an inkling of a thought of making a more long-term strategic move. What are some other things I need to think about besides the VMs, or if you're going cloud native, right? The compute, the storage, the memory. What are some other things I got to think about as I'm looking at making that kind of big move?
Kurt, you want to take that or?
Yeah, really in all of this, there's an infrastructure built around this that your engineers have been using for 15 or 20 years, that are all the tool sets and kits that are around that. So really making sure that you're training your team around there's a whole new way of doing things. The cheese is going to be moved on just about every infrastructure engineer, depending on what roadmap you choose to take. Now their cheese may get progressively more expensive if they choose to stay in their existing spot, but hey, the price of cheese occasionally offsets the cost of change in the people tax. But you have to upskill your people. You have to change this. You have to really get into your monitoring and your management tools over this. Really taking a hard look into what are the things that are being given to me for free in this basket and bundle. Those are the things that I think really you have to look deep into this, because anything can change now. The world of KVM and Nutanix have really kind of flipped this on its head along with Azure Stack. Those are the things I think are really important. But I don't know, Dimitri, anything you'd add to that?
No, you're right on. It is really complicated, and you have to look at, all right, if I have a hybrid or a multi-cloud approach, which really seems to be the trend, the secret, sauce, if you will, is, Matt, you say you take it away from just the applications and make it broader, but you do find that applications are more efficient or cost effective in certain platforms, or just unable to be moved. So you have to have this multi-cloud approach, and that's where the complexity comes in. Upskilling your team. And this is where we see a number of customers recognizing, okay, I've done it in-house. Maybe now I need to look for a management partner who either can provide full management or management of the components and aspects that I can't. Someone who's flexible enough to allow that, air quotes, co-management is the right way to go about that. And oftentimes those management partners can be used as not necessarily a crutch, but a path as you start to upskill your team. And then eventually you can take back some of that management as you learn just what is working for me and what areas do I want to focus on. And what's the best impact for my team?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is maybe the least sexy thing in all of this, which is the thing that we've all been talking about from a trend perspective, which is that hyperconverged infrastructure. A lot of this is about absorbing and really being able to maximize that HCI infrastructure. So be it Nutanix, VxRail, or anything coming from any of the other suppliers, this is really out there to help maximize this. For as scary as this is, and this is a cost increase, our friends at Broadcom VMware are calling this a simplification and making it easier to consume. So really matching your hardware to, was it the instance types you're building and your license types, I think is really important in this.
You're right on, Kirk. And you mentioned that, like I said, TierPoint's a pinnacle partner. We're very proud and to be that for them and work with them. That said, you mentioned Azure Stack. We are about 2 weeks away from announcing a fully managed Azure Stack offering for our customers, a hosted Azure Stack offering as an alternative and that complements the VMware portfolio. We also have a Nutanix offering, and now we'll be having an Azure Stack offering, which is going to give customers a lot of options as they move forward.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if we were in a hypervisor conversation here and I didn't bring up our old friends at Hyper-V. I think we're bringing up potentially a topic here that hey, people are hearing Azure Stack and they're going, what about my old friends at Hyper-V? Hyper-V has had an end of support date announced of, I believe it's January of 2029. So this is not, while in IT, 5 years is both a long and a short time simultaneously. As you're looking into this, is saying like, hey, I'm just going to flip it from VMware to Hyper-V, and then I'll deal with Hyper-V moving forward. Really, we're talking about like, hey, how do you consume Azure Stack? Microsoft is doing a lot of things to make that a really consumable product. You hear Dimitri bring up that, hey, that's hostable in their data centers here in the next handful of weeks. That's also coming onto people's premise. The Microsoft version and hey, Microsoft flavor of the reality is real here, but again, that is one path forward in this, and it's not a one size fits all with the Azure approach either.
I think what I heard you say, Kirk, is your plan better not be to go to Hyper-V, because then you're going to need another plan in a few short years here.
No, perfectly said, Matt.
Kirk, you hit on it a little. Let's talk about some of the open source alternatives that exist. KVM is one you mentioned by name a couple times here. Tell us a little bit about, certainly we saw, I think it was a Tech Radar poll that went and looked at some VMware customers, and we saw that about 20% were contemplating leaving the VMware ecosystem, and the vast majority of those were looking at open source alternatives such as KVM. Tell us a little bit about those tools, what they look like, the maturity of them, what makes them even an attractive option to consider, and maybe give us a little pros and cons here.
Yeah, I think KVM, it is everything and can be nothing depending on how you choose to deploy it. This is something that is maturing. The managed service ecosystem is one that is emerging on this. I'd say the one that everyone's probably most familiar with is a company that got acquired by IBM a few years ago at Red Hat. So it is a mature enterprise grade version of this, but there is a lot of strains off of or a lot of veins off of the tree, so to speak, on this. So kind of the nice part about KVM is if you migrate to KVM, it can become the ultimate portability tool from cloud provider to cloud provider, hosting provider to hosting provider. Where right now it is limited is, hey, there are not a ton of managed service providers in the KVM world. So, hey, me taking it and saying, hey, I'm run this in TierPoint. Well, I think feasibly they could do it. There may not be a practice built around it. And I'm not picking on TierPoint with that. This is, I think, goes into the larger managed service provider ecosystem within the IaaS environments. But if you said, hey, I'm going to take all my VMware, I'm going to take it to KVM in a very simplified format here, you could take that into Azure, you can move it over into AWS, you can go over to GCP with it, you can bring it back to Prem if you so chose. Really, that's a lot of the freedom, but hey, how are they licensing it? How are you updating it? When are you getting patch notes on it? Like, how secure is that? Is that kernel is really where you want to start focusing a lot of your time on this, which is, it is a good idea, but hey, how often and when am I getting those security patches? Because as we all know, saving a couple $100,000, even a couple $1 million on software is great until the day that, hey, we only get once a year security updates that are maybe not as robust as we would hope.
So it sounds like, Kirk, what you're saying here is if you're going to contemplate that route, you're probably a lot more DIY from an options perspective than some of these other ecosystems where there's a strong managed partner community around it, strong practices built around it today. Dimitri, did you have anything to share on some open source alternatives from your perspective?
Kurt hit on it pretty well. When you come down to it, moving to an open source solution, while at first glance looks cheaper, it does come with its own costs. It's the operational cost now, as opposed to the software, the licensing and support costs. It does take more effort. In my last company I worked at, we had an open stack solution that we as a service, and it was extremely costly from a human resource perspective to maintain and keep up to date. Very effective when you do, but it is, again, you're talking about a different set of skills that you may have today, different type of engineering persona that you have to maintain that. So it's an option to consider. It depends on where you are. Larger enterprises is probably shy away from that very quickly. The smaller shops, the more DIY shops, that might be an option. It definitely might be an option.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add from a KVM world is there are some things built natively into that where you may remove some ecosystem around it, but it's like any piece of technology, you have to know how to tune it. You have to know the toggles and the dashboards and how to use that. And then you have to rebuild your monitoring platform in and around the KVM environment. So DIY is the perfect way to do this, or I should say to explain this in the short term. I think that you will start to see some more folks go into that, but the Nutanixes of the world, the Azure Stacks, the VMwares, that is where we see more realistically where the managed service ecosystems live, at least in the short to medium term here, with KVM being, say, medium to long.
Perfect. Guys, I think we're close to wrapping up here. We wanted to reserve some time for some questions from the audience, so we'll see if anything comes in here. But any additional thoughts you wanted to share as we wrap up?
We've covered a lot today. I think if I were to recap, what I would tell our audience here is, first of all, you need to understand where you are with your licensing. If you're fortunate enough to have recently renewed your licensing and you have a couple of years, you may have a couple of years runway, and that's great. If that's coming up, you probably are a little bit behind the gun. But in either case, you now more than ever need to start focusing on a longer IT strategy, and then purchase the licenses you need for the terms that you believe you're going to be using them. Be very judicious about that as you go forward, and find a partner, any partner. You really need to not only consult with your VMware team, your Eclipse, get a second opinion. It's always wise.
Kirk?
No. There is the easy route in this, which is the grin and bear it route, and then there is the, hey, how do I maximize and make my dollars as effective as possible and a go forward. You have to understand where you are in your VMware contract. You have to understand what is changing around you in your VMware contract, and every other tool that lives within your data center, from a management, monitoring, reporting, backup, DR, all those conversations are intertwined. It's going to take some time to unwrap and unwind the ball of yarn that you've built over the last 25 years. What's nice is all the standards are changing simultaneously, so it's not frustrating. Oh wait, no, it's super frustrating for every client to have to deal with this. This is a conversation that is going to take time, and there are several mistakes that are very easily made in this if you're not going in with all the information at hand.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. I think some great thoughts were shared here. A lot to consider, a lot to chew on. If you're looking for some help, please reach out. You can find Eclipse at eclipse-telecom.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn. We're headquartered out of Chicago, so easiest way to find us if there is more than one match, which sometimes there is, depending on where you're doing your search. But again, it's eclipse-telecom.com. To make sure, I'm pretty sure everybody knows where to find TierPoint.
Who are you?
But would love to continue the conversation with you. I think the most important thing that was said here today is find a partner, a second set of eyes. The reality is sometimes it can just only be the primary use is gives you peace of mind, right? To know that you're thinking about things the right way, you're taking the right path, you've optimized your spend as much as you can. So I'll leave with that piece of advice to our participants today. And again, thanks to our panel for joining and wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.